So when looking at this previous graph that we had a second ago, I drew the long run average total cost curve as having this U shape. Now it's interesting to note why this is the case. Why would it have this U shape? So I'm just going to draw the long run average total cost curve on its own. So still with the cost and with the cost and the quantity of output, and this is my long run average total cost. Okay. So in this situation here, we have a downward section, a flat section. So I could separate this into 3 spots. And now it starts going up afterwards on the right. So let's just treat this here as flat. Even though it's not completely flat, this is down, this is up. So what represents this first part there? It's a section that we refer to as economies of scale, where my percentage increase in my output is greater than my percentage increase in all my inputs. This is one way to see it. There's a few ways to refer to it, but this would be to say if I were to double the space I have in my factory, double my workers, double everything that I use as a factor of production, as an input, my output will more than double. So assuming that those costs of those factors have stayed the same, I double my cost, but I more than double my output. If the output is selling for the same price as it was before, I am going to be lowering my per unit cost. So this is when production becomes more efficient and per unit costs are falling. So this first part over here, I could see that going from producing this amount, let's say it's 10, to producing 20, my per unit costs have fallen. Maybe it used to be 5 million to produce, and now it's 3 million to produce a given plane if I were to simply double the output. So this area here refers to economies of scale, which is also known as increasing returns to scale. And it represents a situation where things become more efficient. So economies of scale is going to be a concept you will see a lot in the newspapers or in different concepts of different big firms saying we're now getting bigger and we're now enjoying economies of scale. We are now lowering our production costs, our unit costs, because we are now bigger. So when I think of economies of scale, I often think about airplane producers. Well, airplane producers, you have very high technological costs, research and development, engineers. So if you were to go from a situation where you only have 10 planes produced to 20 planes produced, if it's the same plane and the same production process, you don't have to pay for those engineers again. You might hire a few extra ones, but you won't have to double them. You won't have to double the research team. You won't have to double a bunch of things. All you'll have to double is production situations that you have, like all the machinery to produce. Or you might just have a situation that the factory was not used to full capacity, and now you simply installed a night shift for your workers that are producing these things. So simply you're able to increase production widely by not increasing your cost that much, which means that your cost per unit goes down. Because the big thing that you have to remember with long run average costs, total costs, this average total cost is your cost per unit on average. So over here, my cost per unit is 5 million for one plane. Over here, if I produce more, my cost per unit per plane might be 4.3, and then over here it's 3 million. It's not my total cost that goes down. There's no way that I could double the amount of airplanes I produce and my total cost goes down, but my average cost per unit has gone down. So if you can enjoy economies of scale, it's definitely a plus. And that's the situation that as you grow, it might be easier for you to be more profitable. So if you're starting a rock climbing or a ski camp type of business and you have high insurance costs, if you just started up and you have a few customers, it might be hard to make profits to be competitive in your pricing. But as you have more and more customers, those very big overhead costs such as insurance may not increase. Therefore, you're spreading that cost on more people, you're enjoying economies of scale, and your per unit cost goes down, making it easier for you to make profit. The second segment over here refers to constant returns to scale, where if I double my inputs and it will lead to doubling of my outputs. So the per unit costs stay the same in this context. So here I have constant returns to scale. Essentially, I have a situation that if I'm producing, let's say here, 30 units or 60 units, my cost hasn't changed. My cost per unit hasn't changed. So an example of this would be if you own McDonald's in Lennoxville and you're debating opening one up in Kelowna or something else. And to open up this other McDonald's, you have the same costs involved. It's the same kind of building. And you have the same costs in terms of workers, in terms of materials and everything else. Well, in that situation, you would double your costs. You would have one manager per place. You would double all of your inputs. And simply, you're just the investor. You'd probably expect to sell twice the amount of burgers than before, but because all your costs are double and you produce double, well, your per unit cost has not changed. If you're in a situation, though, that you open one up in Lennoxville and now you decide to open one up on Wellington Street in Sherbrooke, well, then you have a situation that you might be able to save on certain costs because you might have only one manager for both, or your shipping costs of the food might go down slightly. So in that situation, by growing, you might enjoy some economies of scale. But if it's two disjoint companies and they have their same costs individually and their same amount of production levels, you'll probably be in this situation of constant returns to scale. The last one for some is the hardest to understand. That's our decreasing returns to scale, which is we increase inputs by a certain percentage and output does not follow. And in reality, what's going on here is that the per unit costs are going up. So these costs are going up. The more output I produce, the higher the costs. So this is economies of scale or decreasing returns to scale. And why would this decreasing returns to scale exist? Well, it's because maybe beyond a certain size, it's becoming hard to manage this business. And beyond a certain size, there's just too many costs that are coming in. Things are getting mismanaged. Money is getting lost in random areas. And therefore, if I decide to produce more, I might end up in a situation where my costs are higher. Okay, so this would be the kind of situation that you would often see some firms that are just very big start selling off or separating some of its businesses. So you might see some companies decide, we're no longer going to work all together. I'm just going to sell off this division or sell off this other division. And the reason why you would do that sometimes is you think these two divisions might be more productive individually, or you need some money sometimes. But if you're just splitting them up, but it stays the same company, but they're managed completely distinctively, well, that could be a situation that you have decreasing returns to scale. So it's a situation where you want to reduce the size to avoid managerial inefficiencies. So when thinking back of short run versus long run, well, in the short run, we saw that this was dropping here because of specialization, whereas in the long run, this is dropping because we're able to expand output without increasing our input costs all that much. It might be because we have a underutilized factory or underutilized kitchen. And it's simply, even though we have full flexibility on choosing our output levels in the long run, choosing our firm size in the long run, we might be in the situation that you can't simply produce an airplane cheaply if you only produce one. Therefore, by increasing your production level, even though you have full flexibility on the size of your factory, there might be some economies of scale possibly enjoyed by increasing your production levels. And this upward section in the short run was due to diminishing marginal product of labor because some of the factors, the factory space was fixed. Here it's not fixed, but it's still upward sloping due to managerial inefficiencies. It's a situation where the business is simply mismanaged because it's too large. You sometimes see this. You have some entrepreneurs that are very good at starting up a business. Then they're very good at carrying through to a mid-sized business. But when it becomes very large, they become overwhelmed and they start hiring too many people, making too many wasteful decisions, and therefore their company suffers because their unit cost of production actually goes up. So you want to be in the situation in the business that you're in, ideally in the situation where your costs are as low as possible, because if your unit costs are as low as possible, it's much easier to compete with anyone else. Even if the prices are low, you're going to still be able to make profits, where some other people might be coming in and won't be able to compete against you. Makes it very hard in industries where we have strong economies of scale for new entrants to come in unless they are protected by their countries in terms of protective barriers. Things that you observe when you have different countries such as China or Brazil who decides to start producing their own vehicles, their own cars. They often have to implement infant industry protective barriers on imports so that their company could grow to a certain size to start being competitive against these very large automobile companies across the world.